Good evening. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Aga Khan Centre this evening and to introduce our guest, Mohammed Al-Assad. Mohammed Al-Assad, as many of you will know, is an architect and architectural historian. He's also the founding director of the Centre for the Study of the Built Environment in Amman. A prolific writer, he has also contributed to a number of documentaries on Islamic art and architecture, and he currently sits on the steering committee at the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. He joins us this evening to share his considerable insights on upgrading the quality of life in urban environments in the Muslim world.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you all for coming. I have one friend in the audience, a very close friend, Khalid. Welcome, Khalid. What I'm going to do today is really bring three topics together into one presentation. The first subject is that of enhancing the quality of urban life for Muslim communities. And I'm also connecting it to how projects that have received the Aga Khan Award for Architecture, you can hear me, I guess, have received the Aga Khan Award for Architecture over the last 40 years since its inception, contributed or provided examples of enhancing the quality of urban life for Muslim communities. And the third topic that I will talk about is how we, the Center for the Study of the Built Environment in Amman, which I direct, and the Aga Khan Trust for Culture have come together to create an open online course that addresses how these projects that have received the Aga Khan Award for Architecture have contributed to enhancing the quality of urban life. Let me begin with a few comments just about urban life, very general comments. You probably all hear that now over half of the world's population is living in urban centers and are no longer living in rural areas. And the rate is increasing. And as a result of that, the number, the challenges that cities are facing are incredible, and cities are coming under a great deal of stress. This kind of stress is related to a number of issues and a number of challenges. We have problems with slums, the growth of slums and overcrowding of cities. We have problems relating to mobility. How do people move in and around cities? We have problems with urban sprawl. Cities are just growing geographically and they're just gobbling up natural areas and agricultural areas that are located around them. We have problems relating to sanitation and to waste management. And we also have problems relating to preserving the built heritage of cities. As cities are growing, there is great pressure to destroy these buildings and build larger ones in order to accommodate economic, commercial, and population growth. And we also have that very serious problem of affordability. Cities are becoming extremely expensive. And generally, we are finding out that throughout the world, and not just the poor, but also the middle class, are facing very difficult situations when it comes to affording reasonable, suitable housing. So we have all these problems that we need to address. And luckily, there are interesting solutions, innovative, thoughtful, sensitive solutions that are coming up. And as I would like to show, I think a number of the projects that have received the Aga Khan Award for Architecture provide us with interesting examples of how these challenges may be addressed. Let me say now a few comments about the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. I've been fortunate over the years to have had an involvement with the award through various capacities. It's been 30 years since I started actually my affiliation with the award as a technical reviewer, steering committee member. I participated in some of the publications that the award has come up with. And over the years, it has struck me that the award really has become this incredible repository of knowledge. A tremendous amount of knowledge has been accumulated through the award. Partly, this kind of accumulation is as a result of the nomination process. Projects are nominated to the award, a number of them are shortlisted, and a number of them receive the award. Over the years, 4,800 projects have been nominated for the award. This is over 40 years. Of these, 350 have been shortlisted, and of these, 115 have received it. Here I'm just showing you for the 2016 cycle. The award is given every 3 years. 19 projects were shortlisted out of 350 that were nominated, and then 6 have received it. So you can imagine this incredible database that has evolved over the years. We have 4,800 projects, and all of these have been extensively documented by the award. And of course, the nominated, the shortlisted and the winning projects have been even more extensively documented. So as a result, we basically have this phenomenal database of projects, many of which are remarkable in terms of helping improve the quality of the built environment for Muslim communities, and we have a great deal of information about them, and we can learn a great deal from them. Not just that, the award also has been involved in publications, in conferences, in videos, in movies, in exhibitions that have also informed us increasingly and in a more informed manner about what is taking place with the built environment in the Islamic world. And more than that, the award has created an incredible network, a global network over the years, with a variety of people as the award has evolved. So it has created networks with a variety of people, including architects, designers, engineers, clients, policymakers, scholars, and a variety of other people. And this is also very valuable. And generally, it has done all it can to disseminate that information through publications, through films, through conferences, through exhibitions, and most importantly, through, some of you might know it, the ArcNet site. It's the online platform that the Aga Khan Trust for Culture established with MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, back in the year 2000. And as much as possible of the information of that database that the Aga Khan has developed over the years is basically out. This is all wonderful, but there is a shortcoming. And that is that this information is in some ways presented in a passive or in an unprocessed manner. So it's left to you as a user to decide how best to make out of that information that the award makes possible to us. It is not processed to us, even though actually we can look at many themes that exist with all that information that is presented by the award. And so this information, I would say, is not curated. And I can make that kind of comparison. If you look at the collection of the museum, if the museum places that collection to you and provides you with basic information about it, it's very important, it's very helpful, it's very useful. But if that museum creates exhibitions that follow, that take, let's say, a group of that collection, and that group then is presented thematically, basically according to technical issues, social issues, economic issues, political issues, we are far more thoroughly informed about it. And it is my feeling that the enormous knowledge that the award has done still has not been curated enough. And I feel that through the course that I will talk to you about, we've had the opportunity to engage in a bit of curation with the material that has been created by the Aga Khan Award. Let me move on to the course. As I said, this course was carried out through the center I direct, the Center for the Study of the Built Environment, in association with the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. More specifically, it was done in association with the education program of the Aga Khan Trust for Culture. As you know, the Aga Khan network of institutions has created a number of valuable education initiatives over the years. You have the Aga Khan Education Services, there is the Aga Khan Program for Islamic Architecture at Harvard and MIT, there are the Aga Khan Academies, and of course the Aga Khan Universities. And this education program is the latest of these initiatives. This was about 2 years ago, and they approached me and said, you know, we really believe in the value of online courses. They are a way in which you can provide relatively high quality instruction to a wide variety of people. You know, anyone, anywhere in the world basically can have access to these courses. And they said, would you do the first one? Part of why they asked me, because I already had delivered an online course a few years before that. And I, of course, welcomed the opportunity. And I said, you know, I'd be happy to do it through the center because, you know, these online courses are really team efforts. You can never do them something and so I started working on it. Here I should say really the cooperation and the support I got from colleagues at AKTC, the Aga Khan Trust, was very important. You know, it was through Luis Monreale, Rajid Sar, and through Shiraz Alibai, and also the colleagues and friends at the Aga Khan Award, basically Farouk Dakhshani and Nabi Singh, all of them were very supportive in making this class or this course a reality. So then I said that what I'd like to do, as I said, going back to this idea of curating what exists in terms of information developed by the Aga Khan Award, I felt that I can give the course on enhancing the quality of urban life exclusively through projects that have received the Aga Khan Award. So I started looking at the 115 projects that have received the award over 40 years. Some of them are urban in nature, some are architectural but have an urban impact. And I chose 15. I could have chosen more. I could have even looked at the projects that have been shortlisted for the award, but actually the 115 projects that I looked at that have received the award, among them I found 15 that really can inform us quite thoroughly and in a meaningful way about enhancing the quality of urban life. So let me just say a little bit about these projects. As I said, the 15 projects, they express an interesting geographic diversity. We have projects from the Arab world, from Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia. We have projects from Iran. We have a project from India, a project from Indonesia. We have a project from Cyprus. After all, Cyprus has a sizable Turkish Muslim community. And we even have a project from Copenhagen. Here we have to keep in mind that we now have significant Muslim populations, immigrant populations living in the cities of the global north. They are playing an important role on the cultural, economic, demographic, political level in these places, and we really need to, I think, understand the presence of these diasporic communities in a more meaningful way. And the Aga Khan Award for Architecture over the years has been looking very carefully at actually projects in the global north that serve the needs of these diasporic Muslim communities. And I will say a bit more about them. Then we needed to think of the themes, of the categories that these projects represent. After all, we have different interventions, approaches, policies towards the built environment that they express, and we divided them into 7 categories. 7 approaches to how you deal with the theme of enhancing the quality of urban life. So what I will do now, as quickly as I can, is to present to you the 7 categories and the 15 projects under them that we use to give this course about enhancing the quality of urban life, this online course. The first category we identified is that of buildings that function as urban landmarks. These are buildings that become markers in the city. They are cities that people feel a sense of pride. The people of the city feel a sense of pride towards them. They are projects that become affiliated with the city. Sometimes, actually, to the outside world, the city is known through these projects. They are projects that serve the public in general, and they are projects that often transform the areas or districts in which they are located. In this case, do we have a pointer, actually? Is this the pointer?
Yes.
Okay. So what we have is the Great Mosque of Riyadh, and then it's connected to actually a complex, an administrative complex also through, as you can see, 2 pedestrian bridges. This is a building building complex from the 1990s. It replaces a complex or a mosque that was built in the 1950s. Now, what we have here is an example that we see in many cities in the global south. These are cities that went through an explosive growth during the 1950s and the 1960s. And as a result of this growth, the urban fabric in these cities, the traditional urban fabric, has been decimated. On the one hand, we have new buildings coming up, but also the automobile really has been very destructive. The car is a very greedy tool. It destroys the city because it needs wider roads, it needs parking spaces, and you can see sort of all of this happening with the destruction that starts taking place in the city. And this project is really the nucleus of reweaving the city of Riyadh. As you can see here, it's a project that in some ways brings back areas to pedestrians. It creates these spaces where people can come and congregate. It provides very high quality buildings. There are buildings that serve everyone in the city. And what we see really is a process of transformation taking place in the city through high quality buildings such as this one. So this is the first building we looked at under the category of these buildings and landmarks. The second building we looked at is the Library of Alexandria in Egypt. This is really a remarkable project. It is the result, it aims at creating a contemporary equivalent of the great 3rd century BC library of Alexandria. And it was the result of a very ambitious architectural competition that dates back to the 1980s, but it took 20 years actually before it was completed. And since its completion, it really has emerged as the main cultural center of the city of Alexandria. It, in some ways, is a transformative building in Alexandria. It is a building that actually is acknowledged internationally in many ways, and also it's a building that serves everyone. And one of the interesting aspects of this building is that when it was completed, 18,000 people were visited every day. And the administration of the library had to actually put a very small entry fee just to be able to control the massive numbers of people who were coming in. So really these are buildings that in many ways are transformative in the city on the urban level. So this was category 1 that we looked at. Category 2 that we looked at is connected to category 1. It is about urban infrastructure. We look, when we talk about urban infrastructure, we are dealing with systems that provide the city with water, electricity, mobility, etc. But we're looking at, again, markers that we're looking at urban infrastructure projects that transcend the utilitarian, that become markers in the city, that become sort of visual markers in the city, that have a presence and that become a source of pride, something that the inhabitants of the cities connect to. The first project we addressed here is what are known as the Kuwait Towers. We have a collection of over 33 towers in the city of Kuwait. Between the late 60s, and this is wonderful because the projects of the award really go from the 60s all the way to the present. Between the late 60s and the mid-70s, Kuwait received a modern water infrastructure system. They had water desalination stations, they had a water delivery network, but they also needed places where they could store the water. And so the designers, it was a Swedish company, decided that they would create these various towers around the city. And they would put them in clusters, and each neighborhood would have a cluster according to the size or the need of water that exists in that neighborhood. And this group is called the mushroom towers, because they follow the shape of a mushroom, and some of them are colored with different colors. So actually each neighborhood has a different, in some ways, collection of towers. And in addition to that, there's also a group that's called the Kuwait Tower. As you can see, it's very different. This one is located in the most prominent part of Kuwait City. And not only do they hold water, they also have, I think, a restaurant, a cafe, a planetarium, a banquet hall. So all in all, these buildings became markers. They became markers in the city. We often associate parts of Kuwait City with them. They became a source of pride for the city. And they really, again, they play that kind of transformative role. And they also, in some ways, celebrate the idea of infrastructure. Often infrastructure is something that we think of as being rather mundane, uninteresting. We only think about it when it doesn't work. But here they're celebrating the presence of water, which after all is something that is extremely valuable and rare in desert communities. So really, it's a really wonderful way of transforming infrastructure services into visual markers. The second project we looked at under this category of infrastructure is the Hassan II Bridge in Morocco. This is a bridge that connects the twin cities of Rabat, the capital of Morocco, with the city of Salah. 400,000 people move between the two cities every day. And this bridge, I think, accommodates 40% of that movement. It replaces a pre-existing bridge. You can see the bridge here. And again, this is really a project that takes, again, a functional item and transforms it into a visual marker. It has some very elegant aspects in its design, whether it is the supports it has, or it is this extremely flowing, sort of curvilinear form. It maintains a sense of horizontality, and it does not block the views to a number of important sites and monuments that are located in its vicinity. But also important is that this is a project that takes a very inclusive approach towards movement and mobility. So not only does it have lanes for cars, it has tracks for trams, it has cycling lanes, it has pedestrians for pedestrian sidewalks. So really it looks at movement and mobility in a very inclusive manner rather than something that is simply dedicated to the automobile. The third category we looked at is that of connecting to the surrounding natural environment. This is becoming, or context, this is becoming a very important subject. We are dealing with tremendous environmental degradation, we are dealing with climate change, we are dealing with temperature increases, global warming, and we think that it's very important that we look at projects that address these issues. Whether we like it or not, the act of building is a zero-sum game when it comes to nature. When we build, we destroy nature. That's simple, straightforward, we cannot ignore it. What we can do is at least deal with the issue as delicately sensitive as we can to keep our footprint as small as possible. And we looked at two projects and we received the Aga Khan Award for architecture that we feel provide a sense of sensitivity towards the natural environment. The first one, again, is in Riyadh. It's the Wadi Hanifa Wetlands project. Riyadh has this valley, Wadi Hanifa, that cuts through the city from north to south. It has a watercourse in the center of the valley. And when Riyadh was a town, before this explosive growth that I mentioned earlier on, this valley actually provided the town with water, provided it with food, because the areas next to the watercourse were usually planted with food items. But then when Riyadh went through its explosive growth, the valley suffered from tremendous environmental degradation. It literally became the dumping ground for the city of Riyadh. So garbage was dumped there, sewage was directed there, and all the building debris basically from Riyadh was just placed there. And this kept on going for decades and decades and decades. Then in the year 2000, the Riyadh Development Authority decided enough is enough, it's time to actually do something about it. And they started this really enormous long-term project of revitalization, rehabilitating the valley. So they cleaned the debris, they cleaned the water courses, they created these environmentally sensitive bioremedial filtration systems along the water course. They brought back the water course and they started revitalizing and rehabilitating the natural areas in the valley as well as the agricultural areas. And in addition to that, they created sort of areas along the valley where people of Riyadh can come for recreation and for leisure. So now Riyadh has this green corridor that sort of cuts right through it from north to south that also provides people with areas where they can really come for recreation and for leisure. The second project we looked at under this category of connecting to the surrounding natural environment or context is the forestation project for the city of Ankara in Turkey. This was begun by and still is carried out by the Middle East Technical University in Ankara. And it is remarkable because it started in the 1950s, it received the award in the 1990s, and during this period, when it received the award in the 1990s, over 30 million trees were planted around Ankara, covering an area of over 4,000 hectares. This is truly remarkable when you think about it. Unlike the project in Riyadh, which cut through the city, this one surrounds the city, but like the project in Riyadh, there are no built components of this project. This is simply about plants, but it has a tremendous impact on the built environment because for one thing, it has helped moderate pollution levels in Ankara, it has helped moderate temperatures in Ankara, and it has provided, and this is very important, a barrier that presents the urban sprawl of Ankara. And in addition, it has created areas where people can come for recreation, for leisure, and so it really is also a breathing space for the population of Ankara. The fourth category we looked at is connected to this last category, and it's creating public, open, green spaces in the city. Rather than these pre-existing natural environments, it's about really creating greenery in the city. And here we looked at three projects, very different ones. We're looking at projects where people, one that are open to all, where people can congregate, socialize, again, relax, or engage in various recreational activities. And the first one is this wonderful tiny little park in Beirut, Lebanon, the Samir Qasir Garden. Its area is about 815 square meters. We're talking really about the equivalent of a typical suburban one-house lot in many cities. So it's really tiny. And as you can see, it's very simple. Basically, it has a reflecting pool. It has a wooden deck. It has two pre-existing ficus trees that provide tremendous shade. It has a stone bench, and then some greenery here and there. And the result is really with this 850 square meter garden, an oasis of calm greenery in the hustle and bustle of downtown Beirut. And it's a wonderful example that shows what can be done with even the smallest areas in the city. We don't really need acres and acres of space to create these kinds of environments. Really, we can do them with very limited amount. In contrast, we looked at a far more daring, bolder project, and this is the Tabi'a pedestrian bridge in Tehran in Iran. It's a remarkable structure, a very bold metal structure. Its length is 270 meters. As you can see, it has 3 levels, 1, 2, 3. It covers an area of 8,000 square meters. Basically, it is a pedestrian bridge that connects 2 parks, 2 large parks that serve the city of Tehran. And these 2 parks are separated by a busy highway. So in some ways, it helps connect them to pedestrians, almost making them one, but it's also a destination also. So what you have really is, as you can see, literally thousands of people coming to it on a daily basis. They come to socialize, to congregate. There are a couple of restaurants and cafes in it, but also it's a place where you can view the city and also view the nature surrounding the city. And it's one of the most popular destinations now in the city of Tehran. The third project we looked at is in Copenhagen, and that is the Superkillen Park. This is a remarkable project in many ways. This park is located in one of the most ethnically diverse areas or districts in Copenhagen. But this area has been suffering tremendously from social problems. There has been gang activity. It's been very separated, isolated from the rest of the city. So this park was part of an attempt at reintegrating this sector of the city with the rest of Copenhagen. And so the architects who did it worked with a local NGO, and they worked very closely and in partnership with the local immigrant communities. And one of the wonderful things they did in the park is they talked to the various immigrant communities and asked them, what do you like to have as place in the park that reminds you of your home country or your hometown? And some people suggested, trees that come from their home countries. Some suggested even play environments from their parks. Different people suggested different items. The Moroccan community, for example, wanted a star-shaped fountain. And there was it's a very minor intervention, but it gives people a sense that they have a say. It gives them a visual connection that they can relate to. It gives them a sense of ownership. And this project has been tremendously successful. You can see it's one that really crosses through the whole neighborhood. It has 3 zones, the red zone, the black zone, and the green zone. And it really has become one of the most popular public spaces of the city. People come to it from all over the city, and in that sense, it has succeeded in actually beginning to integrate this once isolated part of the city with the rest of the city. The 5th category we looked at was providing housing or improving housing conditions or the quality of housing for the people. I mentioned earlier this is a major challenge that we're facing in cities throughout the world. Housing is becoming unaffordable, not just for the poor, but also for middle classes throughout the world. In the poorer cities of the global south, this problem is exacerbated by the fact that usually housing needs are served by the spread of slums. We have very clear definitions of what a slum is, very quantitative definitions. Slums usually are characterized by overcrowding, whether it's the whole area or the actual buildings and houses of the slums. They're very poorly built, so they're not durable. At any moment they can just simply collapse. They are lacking in terms of health facilities, in terms of sanitation and supply of clean water. And very importantly, the people living in them usually do not have legal deeds for the lands where they live. So they are always living under that constant fear of eviction. So we started looking at projects that have received the Aga Khan Award for Architecture that address this issue. And we came across 2 very interesting, innovative, thoughtful projects. These actually date to the 60s and 70s, so now the approaches they have followed are becoming more and more widespread. The first one I'd like to present is here. It's the Aranya Community Housing Project in Indore, India. It is carried out, or near Indore, it's 1 million people. It's carried out by the well-known Indian architect Krishna Doshi. Doshi took a very different approach to low-income housing than was taking place at that time in the 1980s. And usually for low-income groups, you build these cookie-cutter houses and you move everyone into them. The problems with this kind of housing are mainly they are not made to sort of suit the needs and the expectations of the beneficiaries. They are almost forced on. So Doshi took another approach, and that is to take an area that is close to jobs, so the location is important, and then you design it or you plan it in a way so that it has roads, it has open spaces, you provide infrastructure services, water, electricity, etc. You divide it into plots, and these range from small plots to larger plots, and people even of different income groups can buy these plots, and usually the price of the larger plots are used to subsidize the price of the lower plots. A whole sort of ecosystem is developed for them. And for the smallest plots, he even would provide a concrete base, a toilet, and a water tap, and also designed so the inhabitants or the beneficiaries can build their houses on it according to this design provided, or they can build actual everything. They can build incrementally, they can build something totally different. It keeps it up to the beneficiaries to decide what they want. And what happened is really wonderful. People started building what they need. And what you see here is not building houses, it's really building homes. People are building something that they feel reflects their needs, their abilities, financial abilities, their taste. It is really something that they feel a connection to. And you see it in a number of the houses that came up in this arrangement. There were some problems with this project, primarily related to the delivery of infrastructure services, but it's really actually a very impressive model in terms of how we may deal with providing housing for the urban. The second project we look, one more point, even Doshi provided some ready-made housing. There are people who don't want to create their own houses. They just want something that they can move into, and he provided that too. So really, there was tremendous variety and versatility in what was provided for the beneficiaries. The second project we looked at is the Kampung development project in Indonesia. Kampung is the name that is used for slums in Indonesia. Also there's the euphemism, which is informal housing or informal settlements. And this project takes even a very different approach. It actually accepts the existence of slums. Life in them can be extremely difficult, but actually this project took an interesting approach. The idea is that even though life can be extremely difficult in slums, over the years and over the decades that these slums have existed, what Jane Jacobs referred to as social capital evolves in them. People develop social networks, economic networks in these slum areas, and these are not things that you can create overnight. These take decades to develop. And so with these conventional approaches to housing for the poor, where you build new housing and you move people to them, you really run a serious risk of disrupting, if not decimating, that kind of social capital and the networks that people have created. So this project took the approach of maintaining the slums, but they invested heavily in improving the services available for the people living there. So they started, first of all, they paved all the roads and all the alleyways in the area and made sure that every resident had access to a road or to an alleyway. They provided toilets. At the beginning, they provided communal toilets, and then little by little, they started providing public toilets. Of course, there was a ratio. According to the number of people in a certain area, they would provide the number of toilets and so on. They started providing water taps at locations in the facility in this area, so that every number of people would have easy access to clean water. They started building schools. They started building health facilities. And so what they did is really create a full network of infrastructure services in these areas. And of equal importance, they gave everyone a deed to the land on which their houses were. So people now no longer are living under that constant fear of eviction. They own the land, they can sell it, they can build on it, they can do whatever they want to do. And something wonderful started happening. They noticed that actually the inhabitants started more and more investing in their houses and improving their houses. And so people started carrying, renovation work, expansion work. You can see here some really extensive projects started coming because of the services that have been improved and because people now own the land. And again, we see the process of people now creating homes rather than houses. This is extremely important. And this project is really phenomenal. It extended from 1969 to 1979. I think 3 million people benefited from it. And generally, the camping development projects in Indonesia have been very successful, and a number of them have received the Aga Khan Award over the years. So this is a very, I think, positive and powerful and effective model for dealing with housing without having these heavy-handed interventions taking place. The sixth category, so I'm almost done, we have the seventh then, we looked at is preserving, protecting, and revitalizing the city's built heritage. The built heritage of the city is very important. It is part of the collective memory of the city. It has a great deal of value, whether culturally or economically. Unfortunately, we have seen in many of the cities of the Islamic world a great deal of that heritage is destroyed, particularly in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Since then, the situation has improved. I think there now is a growing, still not perfect situation, but a growing understanding of the need to protect that heritage. More recently, there has been, I think, a more intelligent discussion taking place about how to protect that heritage. Because we don't want to just mummify it, museumify it, or to gentrify the areas in which it's located so it becomes something that is basically reserved for the affluent members of society or something that only foreign tourists can enjoy and have access to. You want it to be part of the daily life of the residents of the city. And here again, we identified 3 projects that received the Aga Khan Award that we felt address this issue in a meaningful manner. The first is the conservation of the old city of Sana'a in Yemen. Now, as we know, really, Sana'a and Yemen now are going through horrific times as a result of warfare. It's a very difficult period for that country. And this project, which was begun in the 1980s, presents a more hopeful period in the history of Yemen. Hopefully, it will go back to that period. Sana'a is a remarkable city. Unlike many other cities, it actually escaped that destruction that took place in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, which is really unusual and rare for a number of reasons that are beyond the scope of this lecture. And it's this incredible city because it has these multi-story buildings, and we have other images of it. It has, they are decorated with these beautiful gypsum tracery. It has, the windows usually are made of stained glass. We have a wonderful network of streets and alleyways. And wherever you go, you have these communal vegetable gardens and fruit orchards in the city. It's a remarkable city. And what is also remarkable is that a lot of forces came together to preserve it. There was a need really to preserve that city and protect it, beginning in the late 1980s. And the local authorities here partnered with a number of international organizations, UNESCO, UNDP, and also foreign assistance programs. So you have the foreign assistance programs of countries as varied as the United States, England, France, Germany, Switzerland, Japan, Korea, all coming together and joining forces to help protect the old city of Sana'a. So through this project, the infrastructure of the city was upgraded. Hundreds of buildings were actually restored to serve various uses: residential, commercial, administrative, cultural, and even, of course, touristic. The vast majority of the streets were paved, and the alleyways were paved. And most importantly, a large number of people were trained to carry out that kind of work. So basically, you have this critical mass of specialists in Yemen and in Sana'a who could carry out this project and continue with it after the specific activity came to an end. So it was really quite a successful project. Unfortunately, the political developments there have stopped that process. The second project we looked at is the conservation of the Bazaar of Tabriz. I don't know if you know this, but this is the largest covered bazaar in the world. It covers an area of over 30 hectares. It's an enormous complex. It was one of the most important bazaars in history, an important stop along the Silk Route, and so on. But as usual, with time, it had seen better times, as they say. This is because of changes in trade routes and changes in the way trade is carried out. And by the 1990s, it had started suffering from structural problems. Many of the shop owners started leaving, a number of trades started disappearing, and authorities actually decided it's time to tear it down. Luckily, they reversed that position in the mid-1990s and decided, no, let us conserve it. And they came together with the shop owners, and they created a relationship of partnership to work together to restore the building. So they carried out technical restoration, they addressed the structural problems facing the building, they restored the elaborate brickwork that is found in the building. They started removing insensitive additions that accumulated over the years, such as concrete mezzanines and air conditioning units. But they also upgraded the building so that it would become suited more and more through minor interventions to changes in trade. For example, goods are no longer delivered on camelback. They come in freights, in containers. And the problem is there is no space for these containers. So what they did is that they created unloading docks away from the bazaar and away from the urban fabric surrounding the bazaar. So goods would be unloaded there from the containers, and then they would be moved in smaller quantities into the bazaar. They created fire exits. They started identifying more clearly the entry areas and the exit areas in the bazaar. So really certain minor but very effective changes were made. And basically they revived it. And today this has become, again, the major commercial center of the city of Tabriz, and also a major social center. People at the end of the day go there, they congregate there, they come together there, and it's become, again, a part of daily life for the people of Tabriz. And you can see it's not just the interior of the structure, but also actually the exterior that is very important as part of the whole complex. The third project we looked at is the a conservation project in the city of Tunis. We chose this for a number of reasons, but one of them is that it deals with the modern city of Tunis, not the older city. In fact, Tunis, the conservation projects of Tunis have received a number of Aga Khan Award for architecture, but all of them were connected to the pre-modern heritage. This one's connected to the modern heritage of Tunis, to the colonial city of Tunis that the French built in the late 19th and early 20th century. And for us, it was important to emphasize that heritage is not just the pre-modern past. It's also the modern period, the last 100 to 200 years. The problem is that this is a delicate period because it is a period of tremendous interaction with the West. And that interaction often led to Western domination, to colonialism, and there's that kind of sensitivity, allergy towards it. But I think we need to face it, we need to accept it, and we need to really connect it to our heritage, because after all, often it's even closer to the collective memories of cities in the Islamic world than is the pre-modern heritage. And it's, of course, even technically a remarkable project. Around 130 buildings were restored. A number of them are really remarkable buildings, such as the municipal theater house that is located there. And also there were very positive interventions relating to open spaces. So one of the things the project did was something simple that you don't usually think about. It is redesigning the lighting in the public spaces of that area, because basically when lighting is better, people feel safer when they come at night. So that encouraged people to come at night. They rethought the landscaping. So they planted more shade-providing trees, so that encouraged people to come in the daytime when it's hot. So they were thinking about these sorts of things, and this, of course, is the main spine of the colonial modern city, which is the Habib Bourguiba Avenue, and you can see actually the greenery and the shade-providing trees in it. So really, it's a project that I think emphasizes that heritage does not just end in the pre-modern era, but extends much later than that. And the last category we looked at is the needs and challenges facing post-conflict cities. Unfortunately, warfare is part of the story of humankind. This is something we just have to live with. At any given point in time, we have conflicts taking place in different parts of the world, and people suffer, cities suffer, a lot of suffering results from this. But then eventually we conflict comes to an end, and that very difficult process of reconstruction and healing has to begin. Buildings and urban components that have been destroyed have to be rebuilt, but also the social, administrative, cultural, educational institutions of the city have to be rebuilt. This is even a more difficult task, actually. And here we looked at the city of Nicosia in Cyprus. Basically, I think a number of you know, I mentioned earlier, we have a large Muslim-Turkish community in Cyprus. We also have a larger Greek Christian community. Unfortunately, the relationship between the two, particularly during the 1960s and 70s, was one of violence and conflict. Cyprus was divided into two republics, a Turkish republic and a Greek republic, and the capital Nicosia was divided into two sectors, a Turkish sector and a Greek sector, and each one became the capital of that republic. And in between was that no man's buffer zone that you see here that basically divided the two, and that was guarded by United Nations forces. Then something very hopeful happened, a remarkable thing happened. In 1979, the mayors of each of the two sectors said, let us meet, and they met under United Nations auspices. And at that point, there was a sewage project that had been begun before the city was divided, and they thought, let's see if we can complete that project. You know, sewage does not acknowledge political borders after all, so something had to be done there. And that worked well. And then the two said, you know, why don't we do more than that? Why don't we actually start coordinating activities? So they put together one plan for the whole city, as if it's one city. And they said, you know, we'll put the same zoning regulations. We will start coordinating everything we do on both sides of the buffer zone. And then they started doing other things, such as common exhibitions. They started doing musical performances together. And very interesting relationship started emerging based on the hope and the expectation that the city will come back together one of those days. And when it does, a great deal of the legwork for bringing the two together would have already been created. And the idea here is that two communities whose relationship has been defined by conflict came together and said, let us concentrate on what brings us together rather than what separates us. And we thought that this is really a wonderful model that may be really used or thought of or learned from in many areas where we are facing conflict and warfare. So these are the 7 categories. We did it all. We organized the course. Actually, the whole idea of how you put together an online course is a fascinating subject that's beyond the scope of this lecture. Sorry, this is just an image to show you the complexity of life in history in Nicosia. This is a Gothic cathedral. When the Ottomans came, they converted it into a mosque, and you can see the minaret. And then when the Ottomans were expelled from Nicosia, it remained a mosque, and it's continued to be a mosque. So really, it's never black and white. It's complex, sort of interesting relationship between communities. Often that is based on coexistence, but sometimes it turns into violence. And this is just an image of Lendra Street that cuts through the two parts of the city. And when they repaved the street, they repaved it in both sectors of the city. But I should have said that earlier. So as I said, we completed the course. We put it online on the Future Learn platform. We just finished last week the first offering of the course. We did it over 7 weeks. We introduced one category every week. Now we are hoping to offer it again and to learn from the experience of the last time. And I just want to mention one other thing, which is that we are also experimenting with how to really make the best out of online courses. One of the main challenges or shortcomings of online courses is that they don't allow for any face-to-face interaction between the instructors and the students and between the students themselves. And we feel this really is a problem we need to address. And one of the solutions for this is what is called the blended model. The idea is students register for the online course, they take it online, but they also can register for the course at a local university. And they meet regularly, once every week, to discuss what is presented online under the supervision of a faculty member. And that faculty member can just manage the discussion, or if he or she is interested or has the capacity, can even expand upon subjects or dig deeper into subjects. So they really offer a way of taking the online course and exploring frontiers and possibilities for it. So what we are really hoping is through this experience, through the online course and then through the blended course, which we will be doing hopefully next semester with two universities, the University of Sharjah in the United Arab Emirates and the German Jordanian University in Amman, Jordan, to fully explore the potentials for online and for blended courses. Now to end, I would like to just show you a 4-minute video we did, which is sort of the trailer or the introduction for the film. And the reason I want to show you that is I want to make the course more tangible to you, not just something that you have heard about through, but to get sort of a direct feel of what it is like. This is a 4-minute video, and with that, my presentation comes to an end. I am Mohammed Al-Assad, the Director of the Center for the Study of the Built Environment in Amman, Jordan. And I would like to thank you for joining us for this Aga Khan Trust for Culture open online course entitled Enhancing the Quality of Urban Life. This course will specifically look at projects from all around the world that have received the Aga Khan Award for Architecture and that have contributed to improving the quality of life for city residents. Although these projects are primarily connected to Muslim communities, the messages that they convey are very much universal in nature. The Aga Khan Award for Architecture completed its first cycle in 1980. Since then, it has gone through 13 cycles and is currently in its 14th cycle, which will be concluded in 2019. Since its inception around 4 decades ago, over 115 projects have received the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. Some of these projects are urban in nature, some of them are architectural in nature, but nonetheless have had an urban impact. In this course, we will be presenting to you 15 of these urban and architectural projects that have had an impact on the quality of life in the city. We will be presenting these projects to you under 7 categories. The first category is public buildings that function as urban landmarks. The second category relates to urban infrastructure. The third category addresses projects that connect the city to the surrounding natural context. The fourth category deals with the creation of open public spaces in the city. The fifth category deals with improving the quality of housing for the urban poor. The sixth category addresses the protection and revitalization of the city's built heritage. And the seventh and final category addresses the needs and challenges relating to post-conflict cities. I will be presenting to you 10 of these 15 projects that belong to 5 categories. My colleague Lara Zuliqat, the Associate Director of the Center for the Study of the Built Environment, will be presenting to you 5 projects that belong to 2 categories. As we present these projects and categories to you, we would like you to keep a couple of issues in mind. The first is that you will notice that a number of these projects may very well belong to more than one category. However, we will be presenting those projects to you within the context of the category that we feel they are best connected to. Moreover, we would like you to keep in mind that these projects have received the Aga Khan Award for Architecture since its inception. That is over a period of about 4 decades. As a result, we will present to you information about these projects at the time they were conceived and at the time that they received the award. And obviously, the condition of these projects may very well have changed between now and then. Nonetheless, these projects remain as relevant today to the concerns of urban life as they were when they were conceived and when they received the award. So that is it. I'll be happy to hear any remarks you might have, to take great time.
Take your angles.
Any questions you might have. And thank you for your patience.
Chris, thank you very much for your presentation. I want to take just a step back. The Aga Khan Award for Architecture, as far as I understand, negotiates the constructions and buildings that were built in Muslim context. So in Muslim majority countries, they go like automatically as, can consider them as Muslim architecture, contemporary Muslim architecture or not. And as you said, for example, like in Norway and other countries that are not Muslim majority, they are Muslim communities. So these projects that are built within the community, shall we consider them in the award if they were financed by Muslims, or the architect was Muslim, or they were built just in a place where Muslims were living?
We have this discussion. I mean, Hanif knows every cycle what qualifies as being for Muslim communities and what does not. And this is why I mentioned in the trailer, many of these projects really are universal, and they really apply anywhere in the world. But His Highness has always emphasized that we need something that actually the Muslim world feels is theirs. And the boundaries, even though we're living in an increasingly tribalized world, are very difficult to draw, actually, where the Islamic world ends and where another world begins. And so we're continuously negotiating those lines. But we are discovering, we're having more and more projects now in Europe, for example, because we're discovering that those lines are very blurred. But really, the questions you raise is one that we have every single cycle. And I don't think there's a clear-cut answer, and I don't think there should be a clear-cut answer, because humanity is interconnected. I don't know if Hanif, you'd like to add anything to that.
Yeah, there's a different way of thinking about it. You're asking the question as if Muslim or Islam or Islamic architecture is a style. No.
I can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm trying to voice.
I'm sorry, I quit you.
I don't have a microphone.
I can give you a microphone.
If you're asking the question as if Muslim and
This
Islamic
microphone.
architecture is a style, this is not about style, it's about the human dynamic. So the answer might be that as long as the building has an impact on a single Muslim, it qualifies in theory.
And
So
you
there is
like a mic, please.
no, I'm fine. Too late. I said most of my answers. So I think it's not a concern, because the minute you ask that question and think of it in a pejorative term, as a critique, say, as we shouldn't be awarding a project in Copenhagen, you lose the plot of what His Highness set up, which is to improve quality of life. That's the primary goal. The fact that it does have a secondary goal of affecting Muslims and Islamic communities is a secondary goal. It's not a style issue.
Okay, style is part of the question, but I mean, if it like just the fact that it has an impact on Muslims, but if it's darkly not Muslim or it's not financed by the Muslim community,
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. No.
Of course not.
Actually, here I should, sorry, but just to make another comment, we even had the discussion in the last steering committee meeting. Now when you take classes in Islamic architecture, and the term is problematic, many people prefer architecture in the Islamic world, a synagogue or a church that was built in an Islamic context, even though it is intended to serve a Christian community or a Jewish community, is without doubt considered part of that category of architecture of the Islamic world. So we really should be careful not to draw this.
thank you.
Thank you very much for non-specialist. I'm so loud anyway, but I enjoyed the presentation. I don't come from this field, but I have a question that you touched upon the management of the knowledge as an outcome of the award. And I'm still concerned, I mean, because you looked at only 15 projects, which probably created special metadata and a special organization of surrogates to serve your course. What about the rest of the projects? Is there any mechanism to build a database or surrogates that other courses can utilize?
Well, what I really was trying to say in many ways is that we need to start curating that information. And this was just a small exercise in it. So we found 15 that we could do something with. And again, I make the comparison with a museum collection where a curator comes and takes X amount of objects from the museum and says, I can make a story out of it. So these 15 provided me with a story. I'm sure somebody can come and then create another story with another 20 or 30 or 40 or even 100 of the shortlisted projects. But the idea is to start looking at them not just as individual projects, but to connect them through stories and through narratives. So to me, that subject, I felt these 15 told the story I want to tell. Somebody might use others and so on. It's really an open-ended process.
Thank you very much for this beautiful lecture. I have actually 3 questions. I'm going to ask 2, and if there's time, I'll ask the 3rd one later. My first question is about the category number 5, which offers housing options, which is, in a way, I mean, through time, people have overcome the issue of overpopulation through, conquering the 3rd dimension tremendously. But then, I mean, in terms of sustainability, this kind of option or this approach, is it sustainable in the long term? Because if we said like 9 millions and then in 20 years, especially that you don't have the ability to expand vertically, maybe to a 2nd floor, to build a 2nd floor or 3rd floor. So my question is about how sustainable that approach is. My second question is about whether the Aga Khan Award for Architecture kind of evaluate or examine how people perceive these projects. So I was fortunate to visit Politabiat and see the bridge in a way, and I have like talked to some people asking them like, do you consider this bridge as like a connection point, or do you consider it as a destination itself, like because the restaurants and everything? So do you kind of examine how people perceive them? And by the way, like I finished the 6 weeks of your course, so I was interested like to see whether like the opinions of people about like how do they perceive the socially, how do they perceive these projects? Do they perceive them like the AKA perceive them or not?
Let's go question by question.
Okay. Yes.
The first one is interesting, the idea of going vertically. In the book Pattern Language, I don't know if you've who's the author, very famous author, escapes Alexander, Christopher Alexander. He said something fascinating. Once you go beyond the 4th floor, problems start happening. Yeah. People lose connection with the street. Mothers cannot call their children. So actually, even though we can create higher densities, but socially, psychologically, we should be careful about it. So actually, going up is not always the solution. I'm moving into another subject here. But really here, I think with these projects, don't forget, the density is already there, but we're just trying to find ways in which we can make it more human in many ways. And I think the 2 options worked in many ways. Also don't forget that fertility levels are going down in the world. So we can be hopeful that maybe we're just going through a period, and then if we just get people through the next 20 years, maybe these problems won't begin. I'm being hopeful here, I don't know. The issue of the second question you raised about this sort of post-occupancy, almost post-occupancy assessment in many ways. To be honest with you, this is another subject that we always talk about at the award. What happens to these projects? And I mentioned it, if you notice, in the trailer. You enter into a different exercise. It's a very important exercise, I fully agree. But it requires totally different organizational structure. So what we're doing now, and I know it's taking a bit of an easy way out, we're saying at this point in time, this project was done and it succeeded. Probably someone should now come and start a totally different exercise of saying what has happened after that. The problem is a lot of things are beyond our control. Not us, I mean the people who created it. You find out that the administration that created that project has disappeared. The new administration is not interested. You find out that economic conditions have changed. What I mean is that so many variables take place that are really beyond anybody's control. And so we enter into a very different exercise. And I don't want people to ever say, oh, this is a horrible project because 30 years later it has not succeeded. So while I agree with you that sustainability is important, we also need not to lose sight that something positive happened. You know, it's very easy to always find problems with any of these projects, very easy.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to see what lessons, positive lessons we can come up with. But I agree with you, I think that exercise should happen, but it's a very different exercise and it needs its own team, its own group of people who will do it. We tried to do it at the award, but we discovered it needs so many resources that it was beyond our capacity. You know, the award can basically barely cover the kind of work it has. So you almost need another organization to come in and say, okay, let's now look at what happens 10, 20, 30, 40 years after. You had a third question?
I don't want to ask a lot of questions, but yeah, so technically my question is about the post-conflict cities. Do you consider the politicized process behind any post-conflict? So in many post-conflict cities, that there has been some projects that have political agendas behind them. Mm-hmm. So do you consider that while this sensitivity, this political sensitivity, do you consider it before examining or evaluating any project or no?
Well, in this case, for better or worse, this was the only project we had.
Okay.
So we didn't get the opportunity to compare it with others. And as I said, I mean, I was looking just at the projects that have won the award. I think if you want to enter this field, and it's a very wide field, you have to look, as you said, at many others. But this one really, I was fortunate I was a reviewer for the award. So actually, probably 1/3 of the projects you saw, I was the reviewer for them. So I know them relatively well. And so I went to Nicosia and I spent a lot of time going back and forth between the two sectors and meeting with people from the two communities. And I was actually moved by the relationship they had. And I think they transcended the political agendas here. They really wanted to think about the well-being of the city. But in other cases, as you said, probably there would be political agendas, there would be ulterior motives, and so on. Each case will present its own realities.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure.
You
Sorry,
can go ahead. I guess my question has more to do with whether there should be an eighth category. Looking in the future, at the moment, we have issues with climate change.
Yeah.
It is a massive problem which is affecting everybody worldwide. And especially in the global south at the moment where we're dealing with extreme climate, during climate change, also like urban heat island effect, and this is obviously eroding that social capital that you were talking about because people are not meeting outside, going outside, in addition to technology also, which is, also eroding that tangible social cohesion which actually was present. What are your thoughts on this actually looking into the future?
Actually, it's interesting. We every steering committee, His Highness joins us for a good part of the meeting. One of the things he's been raising now is, for example, coastal cities. He's saying, he's always sort of pushing the award to throw a wider net. And he's saying we have to start looking at these issues. A lot of them are threatened in terms of rising sea levels and so on. But at the end of the day, we depend on what's nominated to us. And so what we do usually is encourage people to nominate projects that address these issues. For example, during the last cycle and the cycle before it, we started thinking of, for example, infrastructure. And so the award team started talking more, in a more active way with their network. As I said, there's a big network that they have. Please tell us about projects that you feel address this issue. We were thinking about industrial projects. Please think of projects that address these issues. And I think this is now one of the things we are looking more and more at. But in fairness, we also have, projects like Ankara and Riyadh These are actually these are 20-year-old projects that already have been thinking about these things.
Yeah.
So in many ways, I think what is nice is when you have such a wide net, eventually you'll catch everything, I think. But we have to make some concerted efforts every now and then to remind nominators, people in the network, please think about this issue. But you're right, we have to make that effort. It doesn't always come out so.
Thank you. My question is more of an admin one, and it's linked to the point raised about knowledge management. Is this course a one-off course, or is it part of a series? And is it only linked to the award for architecture, or is the Aga Khan Trust for Culture doing more on education?
No, that's a good question. The trust, I think, now I'm not part of this process. I was just told to do this course. But my impression is that they would like to do a whole series of courses at this stage dealing with the built environment. And in some ways, we're testing it with this course. We're seeing how it goes. Luckily, I've done one before, so I had some experience. I know what goes, what went wrong, what went well. So we're hoping to learn from this. And the idea is to create a series of courses in different languages, actually. This one, for example, we also have Arabic subtitles for it. I think now a French course is being developed. There's even thought of a Chinese course, actually, in Chinese. Actually, no, the idea is to create a series of courses on the built environment. I'm not sure if it's thematic. At this stage, it's more geographic.
And are these courses developed regionally, or are they developed in Geneva?
No, actually, there's nothing to do with, this is actually one of the, I can go on and on about this. The problem, with online courses, it's like producing a movie. So you need a team, you need to rehearse, you need filmmakers, film editors, etc. And you can't just have one that keeps on traveling. So you have to build one where you are located. Now, luckily, because we did one before, we had that experience, it was relatively easier. And one of the things I've been telling the education programs, you have to be careful. You might come up with a first-rate lecturer, but that person will probably have no idea how to put together the team of editors and so on that you need. So I think there's a learning curve. So we'll see how that goes. There's a learning curve.
Good luck.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My question is about solid waste management and urban planning. We know that in Urdu we say Safai is Iman hai. Iman means faith. Half of faith is cleanliness. That's the hadith of Rasulullah. But if you look at the Muslim countries, majority of Muslim countries have a huge issue of solid waste management. So I'm just wondering if you have undertaken any project which actually dealt with solid waste management at mass level, and if that can be applicable, could you tell us about it? And if, I'm just wondering if that can be used for solving the issue in big cities and poor cities like Karachi or any other Muslim city. Yes. Thank you.
The expert is really Hanif on this. He might have something to say. Let me give it a try first. Well, we've been working more in Sweden on this subject rather than. I've been looking at the subject actually more in Jordan a lot. I've been interested in it because we have a problem. I think the average Jordanian produces 1 kilogram of waste a day. And the problem is people just have no conception of solid waste management. And now there's the whole approach that waste is a resource, not something you get rid of. It's funny that in Jordan, which is an upper middle income country, so it's actually still better than some others, there is no recycling taking place. There's one recycling outfit in Amman, Jordan, imagine. If they pick your recycling, you have to pay them, imagine, to actually pick, even though they then sell it, but that's the only way they can make their economic model work. Really, it's a very, very serious problem. We're trying now through our center to look at composting at least, where you can take care of your organic waste. But it's really very sad that we are thinking at this really primitive level yet. I think we have an incredibly long way to go. Cairo is a fascinating example. I think there was a movie, a documentary created just a few years ago, I forget its name, and it's about the whole solid waste management.
And Sheikh Nasser. Manshit Nasser, yes.
Do you know the name of the movie?
Manshit Nasser, I think.
There was another name, something about Cairo clean, something like that.
Yeah, but the area,
the area,
they
of course,
recycle and they sell and
you have the social issues where you have certain segment of the population does it, and then they're excluded for some reason. It's just, I think it's one of the most complicated issues that you can deal with in any cities, and I think that until we master it, we cannot say we've really enhanced the quality of urban life. I don't know, Hanif, if you have anything you'd like to add to this?
I have a microphone. Mohammed's answered most of the thing, and it's slightly pointing at me because one of the things we get charged with when His Highness selects us for these committees and events is 30 years of thinking in our own work as well. So responding directly to your point about waste, solid waste, part of the award, first of all, architecture rarely deals with poo or any other kinds of waste. It doesn't deal with it. So amongst us, we have tried to bring projects that are civil or infrastructural, but it's not that kind of waste. Now, if you go to household waste and where we are with that, if you're interested in the subject, partly because of the colleagues that challenge each other, partly because of the committee discussions and what His Highness says, but also our own interests, I actually wrote a book on waste recently through my education at Harvard.
I recommend the book, actually.
Yeah, so it's a book that basically looks at solid waste, and it's based on Copenhagen again, because there we with an architect have built a solid waste plant which has a ski slope on it. So effectively what we've said is that if you change people's understanding of waste as a gold mine or as a resource, you will soon turn the thing upside down. And in fact, near that power station, house prices have gone up by nearly 20%. It's actually a social facility. So responding in more detail, I mean, there's a whole lecture on it. I think it'd be useful if you want, you could have a free copy of the book, but it is available on Harvard website, because it's a Harvard book, not mine. But the point is that it is a very big issue, and the fundamental problem is in that comparison when we were doing the research over 3 years. Sweden, for example, uses 90% of its waste to create energy. The USA puts 90% of its waste into landfill. So you can see the contrast between the very developed world and the developed world that has a soul. There's a very big difference. And we've been able to compare this in order to actually produce architecture, beautiful architecture out of it. So if you're really interested in the subject, just look it up, architecture and waste.
I would make one other comment. It's a bit surprising, but actually waste is connected to affluence. So the more the global south is producing in terms of waste, I know it's not something you'd expect, but it means that people are becoming more affluent. I mean, just to sort of talk about personal experiences, anecdotal experiences. I remember when I was a child, people would buy these big olive oil tanks, metal, and after they use the oil, they would plant them. No one does that anymore. People always reuse. There were fewer resources available. So actually, it's also meaning that
they use it for garbage nowadays. They use it for garbage.
Yeah, they use it. Well, that's good actually.
But it's the transformation.
They're reusing it. But I'm seeing a lot now. I mean, again, I'm giving the experience of a place like Jordan where people are not reusing anymore. Shop owners get offended when you don't accept a plastic bag. You say, no, I don't need it, really. I'll put it in my pocket. They say, no, take a plastic bag. So actually, we keep forgetting, in spite of all the problems we're talking about, people still are living better than they used to. Quantitatively. When you can throw things, that means you have more disposable income. I mean, I'm throwing something in the conversation. Yeah.
Another question, may I ask you?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. It's about creating open spaces in urban settings, and it's about creating green patches.
Mm-hmm.
Like recently, it was in media, international media, that a very famous market in the city center of Karachi, historic market place, has been has been cleaned, and there was anti-encroachment drive there. And at one hand, government wants to create an open green space, but on the other hand, thousands of people lost their jobs because the shops were demolished and encroachments were closed and were finished. So how difficult it is for you as an architect and urban designer when you are faced with such a situation and dilemma where at one hand is the employment opportunities for very poor, and a very poor person is competing for quality of life in a big city, in a crowded city, with a very rich man.
Yeah. I should just say I'm not an urban designer. I like to think of myself as an urbanist. That's just a minor issue. I think you've touched upon an issue that's also very important within the Aga Khan Award. Design is not just a technical issue. Often, the architect comes or the designer comes and puts some lines and says it's solved. And this is why I emphasize in the examples I showed you a project like Tabriz or a project like Copenhagen, where you have to really give as much attention to the actual physical design and technical issues as you should to social issues. You have to talk to people, you have to listen to people, you have to really understand what they need. And you'd be surprised how much is resolved when people, feel that they are listened to. They have a say, and sometimes they give you solutions also. And I think this is becoming very important, this whole idea of participatory design. And this is something about the award. For the longest time, we started looking at architects. Architects are creating these wonderful examples, visual and formal compositions. The award has always looked at architecture as a tool of social and economic intervention. And I think when you do that well, all these issues that you are dealing with automatically will be addressed. But unfortunately, many architects and designers look at these issues purely from a formal point of view, and this is disastrous, actually. But there are many great ways of dealing with that. I mean, we've been involved in Amman where we've been working at schools. We basically come to the students and tell them, you tell us what you want. We're not going to tell you what you want. And you'd be surprised by the incredible results that come up and how realistic they are. Once people feel they are part of the decision-making process, they take responsibility. But when they're excluded, then all hell breaks loose. Yes?
So my question revolves around the issue of religious spaces in Muslim minority settings. Mm-hmm. Because when we see Muslim majority settings, and we have an example of a mosque in Dhaka, I think that won an award in 2016 by Tabassum.
The Bong? Oh, of course, the Beit mosque.
Yeah, this mosque. But what I'm interested in looking is what is the criteria to, enlist a mosque in Muslim minority settings? Because in majority settings, there is a list of ideas and concepts like there's regionalism. There are projects that are based on the economic, empowerment and stuff like that. But in Muslim minority settings, when we see changing demographics, when there are immigrant communities who identify themselves with sort of architecture they identify themselves with, because I feel they have a limited option whether they go towards pan-Islamic or they go towards a Muslim, international exclusive or inclusive architecture. So how does the awarding body, considers projects in Muslim minority settings, and what is their criteria in choosing such projects?
Actually, when Raj, who heads the education program, asked me if you would do a second course, what would it be on? I said actually on mosque architecture. Yeah. Again, you can curate projects that have received the award for that. Here, actually, I would say, if I understood you correctly, I would look at the Muslim cemetery in Austria. I don't know if you're aware of that. In 2000, it received the award in 2013. I think it's a remarkable project in terms of the story it tells, because you have, I think, primarily Turkish immigrants living in Austria. They're saying, look, Austria is my country. This is where I spent most of my life. This is where I'm dying. I want to be buried here, and I'd like to be buried in a Muslim cemetery. And it was fascinating how the Muslim community, the city came together, designers came together, and they found a solution. And on the one hand, death is as important as life for all of us. So it gave people a sense of feeling that they're taken care of after they die. They don't have to worry where they would be buried. And visually, it was this wonderful project that is purely spiritual. It takes some forms from, the past of Islamic prototypes, but it also is a very modern project that would fit into any, let's say, city in the global north. Really, I think it's not really a problem, and on the contrary, I feel that over the last 20 years, and I've been writing a bit about this subject, we're seeing a revolution in mosque architecture taking place. It's becoming far more daring, far more experimental. I think a lot of people are saying that a mosque does not have to have a minaret, and a dome and a portal. A mosque can be many more things. And I think this is really, on the contrary, I think some fascinating things are happening in mosque design today. And finally, we're freeing ourselves from, relying on specific prototypes. And they're usually, interestingly enough, Ottoman, Mamluk, and Mughal, and some Andalusian. And as if those are not there, it's not a mosque. And now you're seeing people like the, Marina Tabassum, who are creating these incredibly abstract but highly spiritual spaces. The cemetery is one of them. I can give you actually many examples that really provide wonderful examples of mosque architecture that manage to be very spiritual without having to worry about the past. Now, I don't know if I answered your question, but these are my thoughts. I think there was
one last, yeah?
Please.
I just had a question about, so we have seen the way that the award has become more and more ambitious and more broad in its application. We have seen the award even in Copenhagen. And so my question was, in your opinion, has these also translated in an impact in the field of architecture, more broadly speaking? What is the sort of impact more globally that, in your understanding, the award has had in the field of architecture?
Now, again, this is something that is difficult to quantify. So I will give you more my impressions of it. Now, one thing I know, I've noticed, again, I'm giving you anecdotal evidence here. I know many architects who would tell me my project was nominated, not shortlisted, not winner, for the award. And to them, that is an accomplishment. That's important. Another thing you notice is that the award has a certain credibility. Whenever you mention it, people sort of say, okay, if this is connected to the award, there must be a certain level of quality to it. I think that's very important also. And there's another thing. For the longest time, the award has been looking at architecture, at the built environment, at interventions in that as a way of improving the quality of life. You create high-quality buildings, but if they don't impact the quality of life for people, that's not what the award is interested in. And the award was sort of doing its own thing, as they said, and the world was celebrating the star architects. The award continued to do its own thing, and what you saw over the last 10 years is the architecture world has been moving towards the award. And what the award has been doing, continued to it, not being subjected to the pressures and the fashions of the world, saying, look, it's about the quality of life. And now, interestingly enough, and if you look at the last Pritzker Awards, they're about architects who work on the quality of life. So I think it has had actually a very soft impact, but an impact that really is long-lasting. It's never been about following fashion. And it's always about a vision, a mission for the award. And I think it's very important, and it's stuck to it. So in that sense, now again, I am not, your neutral observer. Someone who's been involved with it for 30 years, so I'm always going to give you a very positive view. But that's my reading of what has happened over the last 30 years. You need to talk to someone who's more critical, I guess.
It feels like a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much, Mohammed.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Fascinating evening and fascinating insight.
Thank you for having me.